The threat of terrorism has changed our physical world profoundly in the last 20 years. Attempting to harden soft targets has made our cities feel very different. But the big plots, like the attack on New York, are now seen as less likely.
Terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda still have the ambition and the desire to launch that same scale of terrorist attacks. But it's much harder for them to do. The security forces that they're facing up against in the West have gotten much more attuned to managing and responding to those threats. And so it's a much harder environment for them to try to do that. But certainly the intent is still there.
The UK's counterterrorism strategy was developed after 9/11. It's called Contest. It has 4 pillars: prevent, pursue, protect and prepare.
And on the morning of 9/11...
According to the head of MI5, who gave a rare interview today, the threat hasn't gone away, it's changed.
One consequence of broad success in reducing the frequency of those kinds of spectacular plots, so-called, has been that we've seen the growth of inspired terrorism. The so-called Islamic State, largely based in Syria, achieved something that Al-Qaeda did not so much, in managing to inspire lots of people with no direct connection to the Islamic State to take their online inspirational material and instructional material and attempt much smaller scale plots, which by their nature are harder to detect.
If you look at UK deaths from terrorism since 1970, the vast bulk were actually before 9/11. They were connected mostly not to Islamism, but to the conflict in Northern Ireland. The last terrorist deaths in the UK were those of Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt, murdered at Fishmongers Hall in late 2019 by Usman Khan, a convicted terrorist who was attending a rehabilitation event. This is the type of lone actor attack that the authorities say is so hard to detect and prevent.
Well, we've heard today from the head of MI5 that they have prevented a number of these types of attacks. There are individuals, and I think the biggest issue here that people aren't talking about, the elephant in the room actually, is our criminal justice system that is allowing people who are still a big danger to us back free into society, releasing them from prison halfway through their sentences often. And we've seen those attacks recently in the last couple of years, of course, and those are just more likely to happen in the future.
So the needle is smaller and the haystack now much, much bigger.
Hostile reconnaissance now is something you can do using Google Maps. You don't need to go to a location to see it. You can see a picture online. You can get the weapon you want from Amazon or some other online forum. You can get your choice of target, as in the individual you want to target. You can find out where they live just going online. So you can assemble a huge amount of information and data online, put that together, and then go and attack your target, frankly, without ever having to leave your house.
And technology has made our world more vulnerable since 9/11. In May, a few malicious lines of code shut down a vital petrol pipeline in the United States.
The biggest threat to life is terrorism within our country here. But there are deeper other threats to our way of life, which are posed by these more insidious state-run threats in terms of espionage, interference in our way of life, interference in our democracy, alongside occasional state-backed assassination attempts, as we've seen on a number of occasions.
MI5, though, can only fight what they can find. So far, cyber terrorism has yet to materialise as a significant threat. More worrying, perhaps, are the events in Afghanistan, where there may once again be the space for terrorists to plan and launch attacks.
David Grossman, I'm joined by Jennifer Miller-Wise-Dyke, who was at the time of 9/11 a White House Deputy Assistant Press Secretary and later worked as a CIA Head of Public Affairs. Matthew Levitt is a counter-terrorism specialist and a former FBI counter-terrorism analyst during the 9/11 attack, and has been a counter-terrorism advisor to the US State Department. And also here is Lord Richards, former Chief of the Defence Staff. Good evening to you both. If I can begin with you, Jennifer Miller-Wise-Dyke. You were there when it happened. You were there. Paint a picture of how instantly the mood and the imperatives in the administration shifted.
It was instant. If you look back at that day, you will see it was a beautiful, calm, perfect autumn day, blue skies. It was a quiet morning because President Bush was not in the White House that day. He was actually in Florida, as everyone is seeing now, reading to school children, because his highest priority, what he was elected on, was to focus on really making our education system in the US much more equitable for people, especially children who were in need, and ensuring that they had great quality education access. That was our focus. We ran on the platform of compassionate conservatism, focusing mostly on domestic and societal issues. And you think about what happened in just a matter of moments. We went from that focus to being in a wartime presidency almost overnight on that day. And it changed everything. You can't overstate how much it changed. I'm sure that most people don't remember even those things that I talked about on the platform that he ran on. Unity was another one. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at his cabinet, it was one of the most diverse. Women, people of color, even Democrats were serving in his cabinet. He really focused on uniting people.
So from that moment, he became, for the whole of his presidency, a war president.
Yes, he did. And it was instant. It was instant. There was no question, I think, in his mind from, once you had the second plane hit, that this was an act of terrorism. And then as the third and the fourth, it was clear that it was an act of war. And we had not, at Fortress America, we had not since really Pearl Harbor had any sort of an attack on our shores. And I think for most of us, it seemed far-fetched at best that, we still kind of lived under this world where we thought the oceans could protect us from things like this, grand mass acts of terror.
And
that we saw on 9/11.
And the impact of that more broadly on America has obviously lasted ever since, on the American psyche. But I wonder, when you, having been in Afghanistan in the early 2000s, when you saw the manner of the departure from Afghanistan, what did you think about that?
Honestly, I'm still stunned. It did not have to look like that. It did not have to, I will use the term chaos to be charitable, that we saw. And I'm still saddened by those images and by the lasting impacts that I think it has on the way that we left. I think will unfortunately leave the impression about how committed we were to those Afghans, especially who worked so hard side by side with America for so long. So I am somewhat heartened that we are continuing to try to get them out, but it certainly didn't have to be the kind of exit that we saw.
Lord Richards, we heard the MI5 chief Ken McCallum on the Today programme, his view that this has once more emboldened would-be terrorists, and actually it poses more of a threat in terms of a well-developed, sophisticated plot, sometimes years in the making. So, in terms of the way that we approach foreign policy and defence policy, what is our best way of countering that?
Well, I think that we need to engage quickly with the Taliban. You might be surprised to hear me say that, but the decision to come out in the way we did, the West did, I think was morally but strategically pretty illiterate. And in order to regain our influence to some degree within Afghanistan and stop it becoming a haven for future terrorism, we need to start influencing the Taliban government quickly and as decisively as we can. And that's going to be a combination of carrot and stick. But more widely, as I heard Tony Blair say in an interview earlier today, I think we need to engage with other countries, both in the region and across the world, in what should be, as was the case in 2001, a united front against terrorism.
But what Jennifer Miller-Wise-Dyke was saying about the manner of the departure and what it said to the world, I wonder, in terms of not only what happened in terms of US military, but also British military and Afghans who were left behind, how impactful will that be on future intelligence gathering, not just in those countries, but when we want other people to work for us in covert ways? Will we be trusted?
Well, I think there's a big question mark about that. And not only have we not got everybody out, the apparent incompetence of the situation that arrived, those scenes that we saw in Kabul airport will have a big impact on the impression that we hitherto had hoped to create in the minds of both allies and our potential adversaries. So there is a big issue about that. But I think the biggest problem in the short term is preventing preventing that ungoverned space in Afghanistan becoming a new haven for terrorism.
Let me ask that to Matthew Levitt. You know, as Lord Rich is saying, the ungoverned space. Who fills that space?
Well, let's be clear. The vacuum created by the withdrawal of the coalition is too large for the Taliban to completely fill. And that means we have two distinct baskets of safe haven terrorism problems in Afghanistan. One involves the areas that the Taliban actually control, and there we're concerned about those groups that have close ties to the Taliban, in particular Al-Qaeda and its potential resurrection there, and the Haqqani network. Right now, the Minister of Interior, I believe it is, in Afghanistan is on the FBI's most wanted terrorism list. And the second basket is those parts of the country where the Taliban is not in full control, and groups like Islamic State Khorasan, ISK, are present. The Taliban has no love for them, but the Taliban is not going to be able to completely control those spaces. So you'll have vacuums in parts of Afghanistan for people even that the Taliban don't like.
So in that case, do we have to rethink foreign policy and our attitude, for example, to China and Russia? Because it's not really in their interest to have Afghanistan implode in a kind of melee of terrorists. So do we have to actually support China and Russia in their efforts?
Well, I don't know if we need to go so far as saying we need to support Russia and China, but we do need to work with partners and competitors alike, including Russia and China, to try and exert pressure. As you heard a moment ago, that will include both carrots and sticks to get the Taliban government to behave in ways that will be acceptable to the international community and will prevent Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven again. But look, I mean, China must be very pleased to see all the egg on the face of the United States and its allies, to be sure. But I think that deep down, China is quite concerned about the withdrawal of the coalition. They're quite happy to have the coalition there, keeping the pot on top of this lid. And now that we're not there, we've gone away. China's still on the border. This is a threat to them before it's a threat to us. And it's something that they're going to have to deal with in a way that they didn't before.
Briefly, Lord Richards, 10 days or so ago, you told Newsnight that, for example, the Cobra system was really set in the 19th century. And I wonder if you were giving free advice, what would you do to transform it? What would you do to transform that whole system?
Well, I know things have improved since I was a member of the National Security Council, but essentially it is a pretty antediluvian system. It needs to be brought into the 21st century so that it's suitable and appropriate for 21st century conflict and indeed domestic crises that occasionally come our way here within the country. It's not that now, and it needs to become, I've called it sort of a national command and communication centre, if you like, but something that can act decisively and at very high tempo that ensures cross-government coordination is effective. Clearly, that is not yet the case. And
briefly, Jennifer Miller-Wise-Dyke, because I know you are, as it were, out of that Washington circle now, but you looking from the outside and seeing where the main threat lies, and the main threat, as we were hearing earlier from David Grossman, is the idea of cyber-state terrorism. Cyber-state terrorism. And are we up to that?
I mean, I certainly hope so. I think some of these threats that we have are not new to the intelligence community, not here, not in the UK. These are things that we have professionals that are working on and planning for quite some time. I always remember when I was at the CIA, it was the things that don't happen that you never hear about that are the real successes. And I do believe that those are happening. My large concern remains similar to what the guests are. Having a sanctuary where terrorists can once again plan, train, and plot is not good for anyone, especially for those of us who live in Western democracies.
Thank you all very much indeed.